Welcome to another 21 Hats Dashboard. I'm Loren Feldman. I'm here with Gene Marks to talk about the stories and issues we think business owners should be following this week. Welcome, Gene.
Lauren, thank you so much. It's great to talk with you. It's been a couple weeks.
Always a pleasure. Always miss you when you're not here. Thanks for coming back. Gene, let's start with a topic that I know is near and dear to your heart, the evil things that employees do. The Wall Street Journal ran a couple stories this week that I'm sure you found interesting. One noted a phrase that I hadn't heard before, maybe you had, but it's in wide circulation now, and that is the phenomenon of quiet quitting.
Yeah.
Want to explain what that is and what you make of it?
So, yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this. I have, first of all, I find it fascinating that the Wall Street Journal, do you notice how the Wall Street Journal writes, they'll come up with something like this, or they'll write something, and then a lot of other people then, it's such an influential, publication, the Wall Street Journal. Because since they did that, right, people are talking about, like, I never heard of quietly quitting before either. And I think that's my point. Quietly quitting, for those of you guys that didn't read the article or are unfamiliar with it, like I was 48 hours ago, it's when employees are quietly quitting because they're not doing their jobs. They're basically doing the bare minimum to get by. They're not going the extra mile. They're not working any extra time or extra hours. They're just basically, just doing whatever they can. And a lot of them have like side gigs or whatever. So it's like they're employed, but they're really not doing a very good job. They're quietly quitting. And the first thing that came to my mind is I'm like, okay, so these are like shitty employees, right? So ultimately when the things come home to roost, employers through performance reviews or whatever, these people will be replaced by machines or replaced by better employees. I think that's inevitable because whenever somebody's they're not doing their job or they're not into it, they ultimately get called out. That's number one. And then number two, I was just like, come on, Wall Street Journal. Like, it's like they're coming up with this catchphrase to get clicks. Like, oh, quietly quitting. What's that? And I'm like, Lauren, like, what is there? Like, so all of a sudden they're shitty employees? Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, I think you're right on target with that, except for one thing. I don't think they came up with the phrase. I think I could be wrong about this, but the article cited a TikTok video that went viral, and I think the phrase. Right, so you're exactly right about it being the kind of thing that that draws clicks, but I'm not sure the Journal came up with it.
You're right, and you've got like the person who posted on TikTok, hey, we're quietly quitting because we're shitty employees and not doing our jobs and being paid for it. And then I think to myself, like, if you would go back and visit a company in the 1940s, there were plenty of people quietly quitting them, except they just didn't have TikTok to demonstrate it. You know what I mean?
Yes, I think it was a really good story because I'm sure the phenomenon exists. The flaw that I found with it is, and this isn't really their fault, I guess there's no way to do it, but you don't know how widespread the practice is.
Yeah, you don't. Right. And, I think there was like, they interviewed some guy from like Gallup who said they did some research or whatever. I always call that stuff into question too, don't you? I mean, it's like, it's not peer reviewed. I don't know how scientific that stuff is. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, I think Gallup is better than many of the surveys that you see out there. And I think it can measure sentiment. I don't know if it can really measure how much this is actually happening.
Right.
They certainly don't know when I'm going going quiet in my job.
Yeah, I mean, it's just and a couple other points on that. First of all, it's I think I feel like the people at the Wall Street Journal were like, people are sick of talking about the Great Resignation. So let's come up, let's steal another buzz phrase from somewhere else. And it's, quietly quitting. Maybe we can get the whole country talking about that. And then secondly, I also don't know either because scientifically, I have 3 kids in their 20s. They have all sorts of faults and weaknesses and downsides, but they're pretty good workers. And I know there are a lot of their friends. I mean, we're intimately familiar with a lot of their friends. They're good workers as well. So I just don't know if this is like a thing. Anyway,
I feel exactly the same way. I have 2 kids in their 20s, and a lot of these people work really hard and really care. And I had the same reaction when I saw what John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods, said. And I'd be curious on your thoughts about this. But he said that young people don't want to work anymore. And
he was bullshit. That's bullshit.
He was very dismissive about young workers who want to find, quote unquote, meaningful work. And, to some extent, his point was you have to earn that right, that you can't expect it right away. And, there's some validity to that. But I wouldn't criticize anybody for trying to find it.
I agree.
That seems crazy to me.
I agree. And what drives me nuts is people our age and older, we're of this generation where we're the ones running the country now, God forbid. But that is, our generation that's out there. And we don't accept change, we still expect the workplace to be just like it was when we were in our 20s. And it's not, and so there are employees that would prefer, young employees that want to work for companies that have a mission statement and they're doing something that dovetails into what they want to be doing and they feel passionate about. What's wrong with that? And they have so many choices nowadays and so many options that employees can make some of those choices. I think smart business owners have to wake up and realize that it's a different type of workspace and we have to be the ones to adapt to it if we want the best talent.
The second story the Journal ran this week was about how more and more, because of the desire to be good role models, it's often on a Friday, it's the boss who's in the office while employees are at the beach. What did you make of that, Gene?
That is exactly what we talked about 2 weeks ago, you and me. We talked, right?
Yep.
We talked about the COVID article that I wrote about it being the best get out of work for free card ever. Say, I tested positive for COVID. I don't have to go for it. And yet no business owner I know would pull that shit. They are working as long as they're doing it safely, but they're working. And then sure enough, 2 weeks later, big thing in the Wall Street Journal that says, looks like the business owners, the bosses, they're the ones working because all these employees they're not coming into work for whatever myriad of reasons.
Although it's the same thing. I don't know how surely it happens, how widespread it is. I don't know. In some cases, the employees, clearly there's an issue about going back into the office and employees are fighting that. And some companies are winning and some companies are losing. But some of those employees who aren't in the office on Friday are working hard. Some of them aren't.
I agree. And, anyway, it's all about, it's such demographic driven and area driven and age driven and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of these surveys and things that come out here, again, I question the data and the methodologies and all that kind of stuff. But even so, I am seeing it with my own eyes that my clients that run businesses, they are working hard. They always work hard and they work through whatever illnesses and sniffles and whatever they might have. Whereas, a lot of employees, are taking, advantage of their employers and the shortage of labor and, not doing what they could be doing. The only thing I can say to you is that, Lauren, all these things come to roost at some point. We remember the great employees and we take care of them. We keep them along. And the not so great employees are either out of a job or replaced by a machine. So that's ultimately what happens.
Well, the other point I'd make is that a lot of the employees we're talking about here, especially the ones referred to in the Wall Street Journal stories, are employees who work for corporate America. And That's different. I think that's really an opportunity for smaller businesses because I think in many cases, it's easier for a smaller business to provide meaningful work and engage employees and have them looking forward to working hard and being in the office.
I'm so glad you brought we weren't planning on talking about this, I know, but there was a study that was just released this past week by Indeed, the payroll platform, the job search platform, and Forrester, I think, partnered with them. And it was this expansive study that found out that employees would take less compensation if they were happier at work, just happier at work. And I was talking about that with a number of my clients this past week, saying that, listen, whatever you might be complaining about how competitive it is to find people and you're competing against big corporations and the government, if it's okay, if you can't keep up with compensation, as long as you're in the range, if you're providing a really good place to work with a good mission and you're passionate and open door policy and flexible work hours and nice people around you, that's what people want, man. If they're in the office for 8 hours a day, even if it's 3 days a week, they want to enjoy what they're doing and who they're working with, and they'll even take a little bit less pay for that. And I think small businesses have that advantage in a big way. And most of them don't realize it. They think like, they're going to lose employees to a big corporation. It doesn't have to be that way.
I think that's a great point. All right, next topic. Let's talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. You wrote several pieces about it this week. One said it will hurt small businesses 3 ways. Another said it will offer small businesses 5 ways to save on taxes. Does that mean that small businesses win 5-3?
Yeah, we have a net +2.
Right.
First of all, we've talked about, I write. For those of you that don't read my stuff or know me, and you're probably smarter because of it, I write for The Guardian, which is like to the left of center, and then I write for the Washington Times, which is to the right of center, and I'm very proud of that, and I also write for The Hill, which I'm not quite sure where The Hill is. I think it's slightly right, but it's mostly in the middle. So I'm proud that I can have different points of view, right, Lauren? And the Inflation Reduction Act, it does hurt small businesses, I think, in 3 ways. I think, first of all, I don't like it when the government goes after big corporations and the wealthy with new taxes. And we've talked about this in the past, that I think that trickles down and filters into small businesses and I think ultimately hurts small businesses. That's one thing. The other thing is that it is, and most importantly for all of this, is that the Inflation Reduction Act is putting $80 billion towards the IRS, and that's going to increase. They're doing it right now because they want to increase, audits and make sure that people are.
Well, they're also doing it because they have computers that were made in the 1840s, 100%. And 100%, they're terribly understaffed.
Yeah, first of all, there were no computers in the 1840s, but I think I understand your point. The bottom line is that this is money that. Yeah, it's right. It's hyperbole. I can't even spell that word. It's money well worth spent because it needs to be spent. I get that. Treasury Secretary Yellen, she specifically said we are not going to be going after people with less than, $400,000 in income. And my response to that is that I do have plenty of business owners that have income in their businesses that are more than $400,000. But of course, they reinvest it in their companies. It's not like they're driving around in Rolls Royces. So I think they will be impacted. And I also think when you look at the numbers, and there's been a few analysis done of this, that they're looking to raise like $250 billion or something. Like, they can't get all this from the rich. There is going to be an impact on, I think, smaller companies and some individuals.
Well, a lot of that impact will be smaller companies that haven't been paying their taxes.
Quite possibly. But at the other side, even if you are selected for an audit, the administrative cost of having to respond and comply with whatever, even if you don't owe the IRS a penny, is still extremely disruptive to a business.
Although I would point out that a guy named Gene Marks wrote another piece about this week for the Philadelphia Inquirer, where you quoted a bunch of experts about things that businesses can do to decrease the likelihood that they will be audited. And the things that you mentioned, I thought were pretty basic, not that difficult to do. Like, pay your taxes, pay them on time, have your taxes prepared by a professional. Don't ignore requests from the IRS if they happen to come.
It is so funny when you're like, don't ignore requests from the IRS. Like, who does it? Who ignores a request from the IRS? But I can actually name you a few people that I know that are like right in the trash bin. So yeah, you're right. There's, listen, if you're running a good business and you've got your act together and your books are in good shape and you're paying professionals as the right advisors, even if you're selected for an audit, which, by the way, if you're doing the things that I lay out in my Inquirer article, you will reduce your chances. But even if you're selected, the process should be relatively less painful than if you're a complete mess. Problem is that there are so many small businesses that are just a complete mess. Period. You know what I mean? Like, they could be honest people, but their books and records aren't good, or they don't do the things that I said that they do. So I think that's just, it's a potential. Now, having said that, I do also want to say, and I didn't put this in the article, and really I should have, is that it's still like such a minuscule amount. I mean, there's like, obviously, 30 million small businesses in this country, 7 million employer-owned businesses. it's the amount of people that will be audited from all this is going to be such a tiny percentage that it'll likely won't be disruptive, but it will be disruptive to some, and that was my point. Let's get to the good news.
Yes, please.
Those are downsides, but the Inflation Reduction Act is, if you're planning out your expenditures, there are a lot of good things for small businesses in here. Number one, the small business deduction for pass-throughs. Was from the 2017 Tax Reform Act. It's basically you take a 20% deduction right off the bat on your income if you're an S corporation or a partnership, which most small businesses are. It's a huge deduction. Like, it's a great thing for most small businesses. There are some that are not eligible. That was going to expire in 2025. That was extended to 2027. So that's great news, man, right? We have another 5 years of enjoying that. So that's number one. For businesses
which hasn't gotten a lot of attention, actually.
I know. That's what I'm trying. For the 4 people that read my article, they know it. Nobody else seems to know. In addition, the research and development tax credit, which people blow off, they think it's for like pharmaceutical companies. It is not. I mean, you can be a job shop or a manufacturer or a landscaping firm, but if you are working on legitimate new products and services and you're testing things out or doing demonstration or sending samples to customers, all these costs, there's a lot of costs that fall under that umbrella that would qualify you for this R&D tax credit. They've expanded it now. You can not only take this credit against your income, but you can also take it against your payroll taxes too. And they rose the amount of payroll taxes that you can take it against. So it's an expansion of this credit, which is a big, great thing for the small businesses smart enough to take advantage of the R&D tax credit. So that's 2. And then there's a myriad of deductions and credits related to energy efficiency. So if you go and buy like an electric vehicle, and Lauren, I don't know if you're like, I'm not buying a Tesla, but I was away somewhere last month and I rented a Nissan Leaf. It was freaking awesome. Like, that thing was great. It had like a 300-mile radius, and it like is quiet. And
the things I've been reading about the Ford, what is it, the F-150 Lightning?
I
think about the pickup that it had. I figure if you can do it with a pickup truck, you can probably do it with a little sedan.
Yeah. These cars are really great, and they are. And now you can get like giant tax credits for buying not only a new electric vehicles, but now what's also new is you can buy used electric vehicles for yourself or your business, and there's always overlap. So that's a big deal for your next car. And then if you make improvements to there's a residential tax credit. It really doesn't impact business property. I'm looking into that to see if there's any wiggle room, like it's, if you buy energy efficient appliances and things for your house, basically, or you buy solar panels, you get a big credit for doing that. And then of course it cuts down on your electric bill. So right now it's residential, but the last time I checked, most business owners, most of my clients do live in homes. So, they have dishwashers and washing machines that at some point need to be replaced. And this is a giant credit for them to take advantage of. And then if you're in the business of making, there's a whole industry of green companies, small businesses that are involved in making energy efficient products, manufacturing them. There's giant tax credits for them as well. And so my advice to everybody listening to this, if you're running a business, is to sit down with your accountant and go through this, Inflation Reduction Act, and pick out what you think you might be applicable to you. And you'll be if you're going to be buying this stuff or making investments anyway in the next 2 years, make sure that you keep this thing in mind. It's huge tax incentives to do this stuff.
Of course, the one part we haven't discussed is the fact that this actually could make a difference in the climate on our planet, which would be a good thing as well. But that leads me to one final question, which is, would you have voted for the Inflation Reduction Act?
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I would have supported the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, first of all, I hate the name. And I really do question
That's like the least important part of it.
Yeah, it's the least important part. But you know what, Lauren, it's annoying to me because it's like, it is the least important part, and yet they're hyping up that it's an inflation thing. that, to sell it, which I think is like, what are we, idiots? You know what I mean? I just think it's like, you think the American people are dopes that because you have inflation in it. But let's put that aside. Yeah, I would have voted for it. And I'll tell you the reason why. I wrote, a year or so ago in The Guardian about how like California, was basically had a new law saying that anybody that had small motor equipment, lawn mowers and weed eaters
Yep.
and, small engines that were combustible, they're not going to be able to buy those things after, I forget, like 2025, like it's coming up. And there's a big uproar about it or whatever. But you know what? People adapt, Lauren. Do you know what I mean? And that's the same thing.
Entrepreneurs in particular.
Yeah, they figure it out. It's kind of like the whole plastic straw debate, like just ban plastic straws. Trust me, we'll be fine. It's okay if you don't have a straw with your milkshake. You'll still be able to drink it. Just you're that concerned about that. But the only way it's going to happen is if the government does get involved and offer incentives to do the right things. And frankly, I think everybody should have an electric car. And I think we should all be using, energy saving appliances and then some. And some people don't get the memo, but if the government dangles enough incentives, they'll do it. And that's why I think it's a good thing.
Gene, I think we agreed on almost everything this
Oh
week.
my goodness.
I don't know what went wrong.
I don't know. Let's go back to
I have one bone to pick with you. My one bone to pick with you is you kind of made a joke about how people who don't read your stuff are smarter than the ones who do. And I'm compelled to mention that I've had lots of people in the 21 Hats community ecosystem say to me that they've learned really important things from your stuff, which I've highlighted in the morning report and in these weekly conversations. And I think, the stuff about the potential tax savings in the Inflation Reduction Act are a great example of that.
I made a big decision. First of all, thank you. And secondly, I made it takes me so years to really sink in, but my market is employer-owned businesses. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Which, and there's 7 million out there, and these are existing companies that have employees and have been around for long enough to have employees. And there's a lot of issues that we face and a lot to write about. That's, so although there's some overlap with startups and freelancers and entrepreneurs, it's people that are running existing businesses need, a lot of information to help them run them, smartly. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Gene Marks is a CPA who writes weekly on small business for The Guardian, The Hill, The Philadelphia Inquirer, The Washington Times, Forbes, and Entrepreneur. You can also hear him on ABC Radio's Eye on the World with John Batchelor. Gene hosts 2 small business podcasts of his own with Paychex Corporation and The Hartford. Thank you, Gene.
Lauren, we'll speak next week. I look forward to it.
Actually, we won't.
Oh, no, you're going to be away.
I'm going to be away. Dashboard's going to take a couple weeks off. We'll be back in September, but I look forward to picking things up then.
Me too. We'll talk to you then.
Have a great week, everyone.